The digital clock on the microwave shifted with a silent, clinical click, 12 a.m. It was officially Illyra's 30th birthday. In the movies, this was the milestone where the protagonist finally had it all figured out: the career, the glowing skin, and the partner who looked at her like she was the only woman in a crowded room. But as the LED numbers glowed a judgmental neon green in the darkness of the kitchen, Illyra felt less like a protagonist and more like a ghost haunting her own life. She sat at the marble kitchen island of her mother's house, clutching a glass of expensive Cabernet that tasted like ash. Beside her, her phone lay face down, a cold slab of glass and aluminum that refused to vibrate. 3 days. It had been 3 days since Mark had stopped replying. Mark wasn't like the others, or so she had told herself. He was a pediatric surgeon with a laugh that reached his eyes and a habit of leaving handwritten notes in her coat pockets. They had been dating for 8 months. They had discussed moving in. They had looked at rings just for fun 3 weeks ago. And then, without a fight, without a warning, the silence had begun. No texts. No calls. Just the digital void. "He's not coming, is he?" The voice startled Illyra. She looked up to see her mother, Evelyn, standing in the doorway. Even at midnight, Evelyn looked impeccably curated. She wore a silk cream-colored robe, her silver blonde hair pinned back in a loose, elegant twist. She didn't look like a woman who had just woken up, she looked like a queen surveying her crumbling kingdom. Evelyn walked over, her footsteps silent on the heated tile floor, and placed a manicured hand on Illyra's shoulder. The touch was meant to be comforting, but to Illyra, it felt like a lead weight. "Oh, my poor, sweet girl," Evelyn sighed, her voice a melodic purr of sympathy. "I warned you about him, didn't I? Men like Mark, they have so many options. They find a woman who is too much, too intense, too emotional, and they run for the hills. They want someone simple. Someone who doesn't carry the weight you do." "I didn't think I was being intense," Illyra whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought we were happy." "You were happy, Illyra." He was overwhelmed. Evelyn reached for the bottle of wine and poured herself a glass. "It's the curse of being an extraordinary woman. You intimidate them. It's always been just us against the world anyway, hasn't it? From the moment your father walked out, I knew. I knew you and I were cut from a different cloth. We only need each other." Illyra stared into her wine. The curse. That's what Evelyn called it. For a decade, Illyra had lived under the shadow of this perceived unluckiness. It had started when she was 18. The ghosts of boyfriends passed. She remembered Julian, her high school sweetheart. They were supposed to go to the same university. They had a plan. Then, out of nowhere, Julian had sent her a frantic email saying he couldn't do it anymore, that she was stifling him. He had changed his enrollment and moved 3 states away without a goodbye. Illyra had spent her freshman year in a catatonic state of grief, held together only by her mother's weekly visits and constant reminders that boys at that age are fickle. "Illyra. Only I will never leave you." Then there was David in her mid-20s. David was a soft-spoken architect who loved her quiet intensity. They were engaged for exactly 48 hours. On the 3rd day, David had called her, sobbing, saying he had realized he wasn't man enough to handle her complicated family dynamics and her unpredictable moods. Illyra hadn't even known she had unpredictable moods until David mentioned them. And now, Mark. The pattern was so consistent it was mathematical. Every time Illyra reached a precipice of true commitment, a move, an engagement, a deep declaration of love, the man would vanish. They didn't just break up with her, they fled, as if she were a burning building. "Maybe there's something wrong with me," Illyra said, the thought finally escaping her lips. "Maybe I'm broken in a way I can't see. Why do they all say the same thing? That I'm too much or too unstable." Evelyn leaned in, the scent of her expensive rose perfume filling Illyra's senses. It was a beautiful smell, but in that moment, it felt suffocating. You aren't broken, darling. You're just delicate. You have a darkness in you that only a mother can truly love. I've spent 30 years protecting you from a world that doesn't understand your spirit. These men? They are just distractions. They would have used you and left you eventually. I'm just glad he left now before he could do more damage. Evelyn picked up a small box from the counter, a cupcake with a single gold candle. She lit it with a silver lighter. The flame flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the kitchen walls. Make a wish, Illyra, Evelyn whispered. Illyra looked at the flame. She didn't wish for love. She didn't wish for career success. She wished for the silence to stop. She wished for the walls of this beautiful, pristine house to stop feeling like they were closing in on her. Blow it out, honey. Let the old year go. It's just you and me now. Like it's supposed to be. Illyra blew. The smoke curled into the air, vanishing into the darkness. The unsettling peace. Evelyn kissed her cheek a dry, lingering kiss and headed back to her bedroom. Don't stay up too late brooding, Illyra. We have a big day tomorrow. I've booked us a spa day. Just the two of us. No distractions. Illyra sat in the dark long after the sound of her mother's door closing had echoed through the hallway. She felt a strange, hollow ache in her chest. For years, she had leaned on Evelyn as her rock, her only constant in a sea of abandonment. Evelyn was the one who picked up the pieces, who held her while she cried, who reminded her that she was too good for the men who left her. But as she sat there in the silence of her 30th birthday, a cold, intrusive thought entered her mind. Mark hadn't just stopped calling. He had blocked her on everything. It was a total erasure. Even for a scared man, it seemed extreme. It was as if he were hiding from a monster. Illyra reached for her phone one last time. She didn't check for a message from Mark. Instead, she looked at a photo of them from a month ago. They were at the beach. Mark was laughing, his arm around her. He looked happy. He looked certain. He didn't look like a man who was about to run. In the background of the photo, barely visible in the reflection of a window behind them, was a figure. A woman standing a few yards away, watching them. It was Evelyn. Illyra had forgotten her mother had surprised them with lunch that day. At the time, she had thought it was sweet. Now, looking at the expression on her mother's face in the blurred reflection, a look of cold, clinical calculation, Illyra felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the midnight air. The 30-year curse wasn't a matter of fate. It felt like a sentence. And for the first time in her life, Illyra began to wonder if the bars of her cage were made of gold, and if the person holding the key was the only person she thought she could trust. The morning after her 30th birthday arrived with a cruel, mocking brightness. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of Evelyn's colonial-style home, illuminating every speck of dust that dared to settle on the mahogany furniture. For Illyra, the light felt like an interrogation. She had barely slept, her mind a repetitive loop of Mark's laughter and the finality of his silence. Action is the best cure for a broken heart, Illyra, Evelyn announced over a breakfast of poached eggs and kale juice. She looked radiant in a crisp linen suit, already prepared for her day of helping Illyra move on. Since you're staying here for a few days, we might as well tackle the attic. It's cluttered with things from your old apartment and my old files. A clear space makes for a clear mind. Illyra nodded numbly. She didn't have the energy to argue. The attic was a graveyard of her past boxes of college textbooks, old winter coats, and relics from her life before each unfortunate return to her mother's house. By midday, the heat in the attic was stifling. The air smelled of cedar, old paper, and the faint, cloying scent of Evelyn's rose perfume which seemed to permeate the very floorboards. Evelyn was a whirlwind of efficiency, pointing at boxes to be labeled donate or keep. I'm going to run to the garden center to get some fresh hydrangeas for the foyer, Evelyn said, wiping a non-existent smudge from her cheek. You stay here and finish that corner of office files. Most of it is just old tax returns and junk mail from the 2010s. Just shred anything with a social security number. The sound of Evelyn's car pulling out of the driveway felt like the first breath of oxygen Elora had taken in weeks. She slumped against a stack of crates, her head in her hands. Her eyes wandered to a small, unassuming box tucked behind a moth-eaten armchair. It was labeled EV. Personal, 2018-2022. Elora pulled it forward. Inside were stacks of old planners and a sleek, silver iPad in a dusty leather case. It was an older model, one Evelyn had claimed she'd lost years ago. Curiosity, sharp and sudden, pricked at Elora. She pressed the home button. The screen flickered to life, showing a low battery icon, but surprisingly, it still held a charge. It was locked with a 4-digit passcode. Elora tried her own birthday. Incorrect. She tried the date her father had left them. Incorrect. She tried her mother's birthday. Incorrect. Then, she remembered her mother's favorite phrase, everything for us. She tried 0-5-0-5, the month and day of Elora's birth, repeated. The screen slid open. The wallpaper was a photo of Elora at her college graduation, looking exhausted but happy. Elora felt a pang of guilt. Was she invading the privacy of a woman who just loved her too much? She was about to lock it when she noticed the mail app. The notification bubble showed over 4,000 unread messages. She tapped it. The account wasn't her mother's professional email or her social one. The display name was E. Vance, and the address was a cryptic string of letters, guardianshotow77@mail.com. Elora's heart began to drum against her ribs. She scrolled. The inbox was a meticulously organized library of folders. Her breath hitched when she saw the names of the folders. Project Julian, closed. Project David, closed. Project Mark, active. With trembling fingers, Elora tapped on Project Mark. The first email was sent 8 months ago, the exact week she had met Mark at the hospital gala. It was addressed to a private investigator. Find everything. Finances, past girlfriends, any legal infractions. I need a lever. Elora felt a wave of nausea. She scrolled further. There were dozens of screenshots of Mark's Instagram and Facebook. But then, she found the catfish subfolder. Her mother had created a fake profile using photos of a stunning, young model. Under this alias, Evelyn had been messaging Mark for months, sending him suggestive photos and trying to lure him into a cheating scandal. But Mark hadn't bitten. He had stayed faithful. The emails grew more desperate. Elora saw a draft of an anonymous message sent to the hospital's Board of Ethics. To whom it may concern, I am writing to express concern about Dr. Mark Sorensen's mental stability. He has been exhibiting erratic behavior and discussing patient confidentiality with his girlfriend, Elora Vance. No, Elora whispered, the word dying in her throat. Mark hadn't just ghosted her. He was being professionally threatened. She kept digging, the horror deepening with every swipe. She opened the Project David folder. David, the architect. The man who said he wasn't man enough for her family dynamics. Elora found a series of sent emails to David's mother. Evelyn had used a burner account to send forged medical records, psychiatric evaluations that claimed Elora suffered from borderline personality disorder with violent tendencies. In the emails, Evelyn, pretending to be a concerned family friend, warned David's mother that Elora had stopped taking her medication and was obsessed with David to a dangerous degree. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place with a terrifying, rhythmic thud. Julian. Her high school sweetheart. The email he had sent her about being stifled. It hadn't come from Julian. Elora found a sent message in her mother's Guardian Shadow account to Julian's university admissions office, pretending to be Elora, saying she was withdrawing her application and that Julian didn't want to attend if she wasn't there. But the most devastating find was a folder labeled The Mirror. Inside were thousands of screenshots of Ilara's own phone. Her mother had installed a mirroring app, a piece of spyware on every phone Ilara had ever owned. Evelyn saw every text, every I love you, every private photo. She knew exactly when a relationship was getting serious because she was reading the script in real time. She wasn't just a protective mother. She was a saboteur. She was the ghost in the machine, the architect of every heartbreak Ilara had ever suffered. Ilara stared at a photo of herself in the Project Mark folder. It was a photo she had sent to Mark privately, a silly selfie in her pajamas. Underneath it, her mother had written a note in the iPad's notepad: "She's getting too comfortable. He's starting to see the real her. Time to initiate the instability narrative. Contact his ex-wife tomorrow." A cold sweat broke out across Ilara's forehead. The air in the attic, once merely hot, now felt like it was being sucked out of the room by a vacuum. Every comforting word her mother had spoken, every glass of wine shared after a breakup, every "just us against the world" speech, it was all part of a performance. Evelyn didn't want Ilara to be happy. She wanted Ilara to be hers. She saw a recent email, dated yesterday, her birthday. It was sent to Mark. "Mark, this is Ilara's mother. I know she's been calling you. Please, for your own safety, do not respond. She's had another episode. We've had to involve doctors. She's convinced herself you're going to propose, and it's fueling her mania. If you care about her, stay away. It's the only way she'll get better." Ilara dropped the iPad. It clattered onto the wooden floor, the screen still glowing with the evidence of a decade of betrayal. She looked around the attic. These weren't boxes of memories, they were trophies. Every box represented a time Ilara had come crawling back to this house, defeated and broken, seeking refuge in the arms of the woman who had broken her. Suddenly, the sound of a garage door opening echoed through the house. Evelyn was home. Ilara's first instinct was to scream, to run downstairs and throw the iPad at her mother's face. But a cold, sharp clarity took hold of her. If she confronted Evelyn now, Evelyn would lie. She would manipulate. She would turn it around and make Ilara feel like the crazy one for snooping. No. For the first time in 30 years, Ilara needed to be the one with the plan. She quickly picked up the iPad, wiped her fingerprints off the screen with her shirt, and tucked it back into the EV. Personal box, exactly where she had found it. She scrambled back to the corner of office files, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Ilara? Darling. I've got the most beautiful blue hydrangeas." Evelyn's voice drifted up the stairs, light and airy, the voice of a loving mother. "Up here, Mom." Ilara called back. She was amazed at how steady her voice sounded, despite the fact that she felt like her soul was shattering. As she heard her mother's footsteps on the stairs, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of her expensive mules, Ilara looked at her phone. She didn't check for messages. She went to her settings, searching for the hidden mirroring app. She found it. A tiny icon disguised as a system update. She didn't delete it. Not yet. Evelyn's head appeared above the attic floorboards. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling in that way that had always made Ilara feel safe. "You look pale, honey. Is the heat too much for you?" Evelyn walked over and felt Ilara's forehead. Her hand was cool and smooth. "Why don't we go downstairs? I'll make some iced tea, and we can look through those old photo albums. Remind you of who you really are." Ilara looked into her mother's eyes, the same blue eyes she saw in the mirror every morning, and for the first time, she didn't see love. She saw a predator. "That sounds wonderful, Mom," Ilara said, her voice a perfect imitation of the dutiful daughter. "I'd love to see who I really am." As they walked downstairs, Ilara felt the weight of the digital breadcrumbs she had found. The trail didn't just lead to her mother, it led to her own freedom. But first, she had to find the one man who might still believe her. She had to find Liam. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, a physical weight pressing against Ilara's lungs as she watched her mother, Evelyn, meticulously slice lemons for their iced tea. Every movement was precise, every smile a practiced mask of maternal devotion. Ilara felt a hysterical urge to scream, to flip the marble island and demand to know how a mother could look her child in the eye after spending a decade dismantling her soul. But she didn't. She played the part. She sipped the tea sweet, cold, and tasting faintly of betrayal and smiled back. "I think I'll go for a long run, Mom," Ilara said, her voice remarkably steady. "The air is so clear today. I need to clear my head before our spa appointment." Evelyn beamed. "That's my girl. Exercise is the best way to purge that negative energy Mark left behind. Leave your phone here, though, darling. Don't let a stray notification ruin your peace." Ilara's heart skipped. She knows I'm onto her. No, that was the paranoia talking. Evelyn always encouraged digital detoxes when Ilara was grieving, a clever way to ensure Ilara didn't receive any unauthorized messages from the men she was currently sabotaging. "Good idea," Ilara said, placing her phone on the counter. It felt like leaving a live grenade in the room. She knew the mirroring app was active. If she took the phone, Evelyn would see her GPS location moving toward the outskirts of the city, toward the one person who held the key to her past. The journey to the past. Ilara didn't go for a run. She slipped into her car, her hands shaking so violently she could barely fit the key into the ignition. She drove 20 miles north, to a small, sleepy town where the air smelled of salt and pine. She was looking for Liam. 5 years ago, Liam was the man she was going to marry. He was a restorer of antique furniture, a man with calloused hands and a soul that felt like home. Their breakup hadn't been a slow fade like Mark's or a sudden explosion like David's. It had been a tragedy. One day they were picking out china patterns, the next, Liam was at her door, his face gaunt, telling her he couldn't be the man she needed and that he was moving to the coast to find himself. He had looked at her with such profound, shattering pity that Ilara had felt small, as if she were made of glass. She pulled up to a weathered cedar workshop near the docks. The sign above the door read "The Grain and the Ghost." The smell of sawdust and linseed oil hit her as she stepped inside, a sensory trigger that sent her reeling back to a time when she was truly happy. At the back of the shop, a man was hunched over a Victorian vanity, sanding the wood with rhythmic, meditative strokes. He was older, his hair dusted with more gray than she remembered, but the set of his shoulders was unmistakable. "Liam." Her voice was a ghost of a whisper. The sanding stopped. The man froze, his back still toward her. Slowly, he turned. When his eyes met hers, the color drained from his face. He didn't look happy. He didn't look angry. He looked like he had seen a phantom. "Ilara." His voice was ragged. He dropped the sanding block. What are you doing here? You shouldn't be traveling. You shouldn't be out." "Liam, I'm fine," she said, stepping closer. "I'm perfectly fine." He backed away, hitting the workbench. You're okay? But the treatment? The surgery?" "Your mother said." Ilara felt the floor tilt. "What surgery, Liam? What treatment?" "The forged death sentence." They sat on a pair of unfinished stools, the air between them thick with 5 years of manufactured silence. Liam reached into an old filing cabinet and pulled out a manila envelope. "I kept this," he whispered, his hands trembling. "I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was the only thing I had left of you." He pulled out a series of documents. They were on the letterhead of a prestigious oncology center. Ilara stared at the words, her brain refusing to process the ink. "Patient, Ilara Vance. Diagnosis, stage 4 glioblastoma, inoperable. Prognosis, 6 to 12 months. Beneath the diagnosis was a handwritten note, supposedly from Ilara's doctor. The patient has requested that her partner not be informed of the severity to spare him the trauma of the decline. She wishes for a clean break to allow him to move on while she is still herself. She came to me in tears, Ilara, Liam said, his voice breaking. Your mother. She sat in my living room and showed me your scans. She told me you were dying. She said you loved me so much that you couldn't bear for me to watch you wither away. She begged me to leave you to give you the gift of a clean ending so you could spend your final months in peace with her. Ilara felt a cold, sharp blade of ice pierce her heart. I never had cancer, Liam. I've never even been to that hospital. Liam stared at her, the realization dawning in his eyes, a slow-motion car crash of grief and fury. But the medical records, the signatures, she told me you were in a specialized facility for months. She sent me updates. She told me when you lost your hair. She told me when you stopped recognizing people. I wasn't in a facility, Ilara choked out, the tears finally spilling over. That was the summer she took me to that wellness retreat in the mountains. She told me you had cheated on me. She showed me photos of you with another woman. She said you had moved on so fast because you never really loved me. I spent that entire summer in bed, sedated on vitamins she gave me, crying because I thought you had abandoned me. The silence that followed was deafening. 5 years of their lives had been stolen, vaporized by a woman's pathological need for control. Liam had spent half a decade mourning a woman who wasn't dead, and Ilara had spent it believing she was inherently unlovable. She killed us, Liam whispered, burying his face in his hands. She murdered the life we were going to have. The architect of malice. Ilara reached out and touched the documents. The paper felt oily, tainted. She noticed a small detail at the bottom of the forged prognosis, a timestamp. It had been printed from a home computer. She didn't just lie, Ilara said, her voice turning from grief to a cold, hard rage. She researched. She practiced. She knew exactly which buttons to press to make you the hero of my tragedy. She made you leave me so she could be the one to save me. Liam looked up, his eyes red. Why, Ilara? Why would a mother do this? Because as long as I'm broken, I belong to her, Ilara realized. If I'm happy, I'm gone. If I'm in love, she's a footnote. She doesn't want a daughter, she wants a permanent audience. She wants a doll that never grows up and never leaves the house. Liam stood up, his stature returning as the shock began to wear off. We have to go to the police. This is fraud. This is. I don't even know what this is, but it's a crime. No, Ilara said, standing with him. The police won't understand. She'll spin it. She'll say she was confused or protecting me from my own mental health. No, Liam. She has a system. And I'm going to use that system against her. She told him about the iPad. About Project Mark and Project David. About the mirroring app on her phone that was currently recording a static kitchen counter while Evelyn planned their spa day. She thinks I'm her masterpiece, Ilara said, her eyes flashing with a light Liam hadn't seen in 5 years. But she forgot one thing. She taught me everything I know about being meticulous. She taught me how to hide things in plain sight. The return. When Ilara pulled back into her mother's driveway, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, skeletal shadows across the lawn. She felt like a soldier entering enemy territory. She walked into the kitchen. Her phone was exactly where she had left it. Evelyn was sitting at the table, a glass of wine in hand, looking at a scrapbook of Ilara's childhood photos. You were gone a long time, darling, Evelyn said, not looking up. Did you have a good run? I did, Ilara said, picking up her phone. She checked the mirroring app. It showed a signal lost for 20 minutes, the exact time she had been in the dead zone of the coastal road. I feel like a new person, Mom. Evelyn finally looked up. Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching Ilara's face for a crack, a sign of the instability she had been manufacturing. But Ilara smiled, a perfect, radiant, hollow smile. "I'm so glad," Evelyn said, reaching out to pat Ilara's hand. "I've been thinking. Maybe we should go away for a while. Just the two of us. A cruise, perhaps. Somewhere the world can't find us." "That sounds perfect, Mom," Ilara said. "Somewhere the world can't find us." As Ilara turned to go upstairs, she felt the manila envelope tucked into the waistband of her leggings, hidden by her oversized sweatshirt. It was a weight, but it wasn't a burden. It was a weapon. Tonight, she wouldn't sleep. She would wait for the house to go silent. She would find the projects folder again. And then, she would start a new folder. Project, Evelyn. The kitchen was filled with the savory, herb-laden aroma of roasting chicken, rosemary, thyme, and a hint of lemon. It was the smell of home, of safety, of everything will be all right. For years, this scent had been Ilara's sanctuary after every heartbreak. Today, it smelled like a funeral pyre. Ilara moved with a clinical precision that would have made her mother proud. She set the table with the fine bone china, the silver polished until it screamed with light. She placed 2 crystal wine glasses at opposite ends of the mahogany table, exactly 3 inches from the edge. She was no longer just a daughter, she was a mirror. She was reflecting the perfection Evelyn had demanded of her for 30 years, using it as a shroud for the storm brewing beneath her skin. "It smells divine, Ilara," Evelyn said, gliding into the dining room. She was wearing a silk dress the color of a bruised plum. She looked refreshed, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of a woman who had successfully reset her world to its proper orbit. "I haven't seen you this focused in months. I told you, a little domesticity is the best cure for a wandering mind." "You were right, Mom," Ilara said, her voice a calm, melodic chime. "I feel clear. Like the fog has finally lifted." They sat. The clink of silver against china was the only sound in the room for several minutes. Evelyn carved the chicken with surgical grace, placing a perfect slice of breast meat on Ilara's plate. "I've been thinking about our trip," Evelyn said, sipping her Chardonnay. "I think the Mediterranean. A small villa in Tuscany, perhaps. No phones, no men, just us. We can paint again. You remember how much you loved your watercolors before David distracted you?" Ilara smiled. It was a masterpiece of a smile, hollow, bright, and utterly convincing. "I do remember. But before we talk about the future, Mom, I wanted to talk about the past. Specifically, about Mark. And David. And Liam." Evelyn's fork paused mid-air. It was a fraction of a second, a tiny glitch in her flawless programming, but Ilara saw it. "Darling, why dwell on the dead?" Evelyn said, her tone light but her eyes sharpening. "We agreed they weren't right for you. They were weak. They couldn't handle the depth of you." "That's the thing, Mom," Ilara said, leaning back. She reached into her lap and pulled out a stack of high-resolution printouts she had made at a local library after leaving Liam's workshop. She placed the first one on the table, the forged medical record. "I saw Liam today." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Evelyn didn't gasp. She didn't look away. She stared at the paper, her face a mask of stone. "Liam is a deeply disturbed man, Ilara. I told you 5 years ago, his grief made him imaginative. You shouldn't have gone there. It's a setback." "He didn't imagine this, Mom," Ilara said, sliding the next set of papers across the table. These were the screenshots from the iPad. The Project Mark logs. The emails to the hospital board. The fake Guardian shadow accounts. And I didn't imagine the iPad in the attic. The one you lost 3 years ago. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't even blink. She looked at the evidence of a decade of systematic psychological warfare as if she were reviewing a grocery list. Then, slowly, she set her fork down. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. When she looked up, the loving mother was gone. The warmth in her eyes had been replaced by a cold, reptilian pragmatism. "I suppose I should have updated the passcode," Evelyn said. Her voice had dropped an octave. The maternal purr was gone, replaced by the sharp, metallic edge of a CEO. A sloppy mistake. "But then, I never expected you to go digging in the dirt, Illyra. You've always been so compliant." "Compliant?" Illyra's voice trembled, her calm finally beginning to fracture. "You told the man I loved that I was dying. You tried to get Mark fired. You spent years making me believe I was mentally unstable, that I was a burden, that the only person who could ever love me was you. How could you do this?" Evelyn stood up. She didn't look ashamed. She looked disappointed, like a teacher correcting a particularly slow student. "How could I do it? Illyra, look at yourself. Look at this house. Look at the life I've provided for you. Do you honestly think those men were going to give you this? Julian would have dragged you to some Midwestern suburb and turned you into a shell of a person by 25. David would have cheated on you within a year. He was already looking at other women when you were engaged. I saw it. I saw the way his eyes wandered. So you lied to his mother? You told them I was a danger to myself. I saved you from a mediocre life." Evelyn snapped, slamming her hand on the table. The wine in the glasses shivered. "Men are a temporary distraction, Illyra. They are a biological impulse that leads to nothing but compromise and disappointment. They would have taken your light and dimmed it to match their own small lives. I am the only one who sees you for what you truly are. I am the only one who has ever been truly loyal to you. Loyalty isn't a cage, Mom," Illyra whispered, the tears finally burning her eyes. "This isn't love. It's ownership. Is there a difference?" Evelyn stepped around the table, her silk robe whispering against the floor. She reached out to touch Illyra's face, but Illyra flinched away. Evelyn's hand hung in the air for a moment, then dropped. "You are my greatest work, Illyra. Everything I have done, every project as you call them, was a curation. I removed the weeds so the flower could grow. I made sure that when the world failed you, and it always fails you, you had nowhere to go but back to me. Back to where you are safe." "You didn't remove weeds," Illyra said, standing up, her chair screeching against the floor. "You poisoned the ground. You made sure nothing could ever grow near me so that I'd be forced to depend on you for air." Evelyn smiled then, a small, chilling twist of the lips. "And it worked, didn't it? For 30 years, you've been mine. And even now, Illyra, where will you go? Mark thinks you're a manic obsessive. Liam is a ghost of a man living in a wood shop. You have no career of your own because I made sure you stayed delicate. You have no savings because I managed your accounts for your own good. You have nothing but me." "I have the truth," Illyra said, her voice growing stronger. She picked up her phone. "And I have these files. Digital ones. Sent to 3 different cloud drives and a lawyer I called this afternoon while I was on my run." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear passed through them. "You think a lawyer will help you?" Evelyn scoffed, though the bravado was thinner now. "This is a family matter. A mother protecting her daughter. No jury would convict me of loving too much." "Maybe not," Illyra said, walking toward the door. "But Mark's hospital might be interested in the source of those anonymous ethics complaints. and the police might be interested in the identity theft you committed to forge those medical records. But more importantly, I'm done being your masterpiece. Ilora walked to the foyer and grabbed her coat. She didn't take her suitcases. She didn't take the jewelry Evelyn had bought her. She took nothing but her phone, her car keys, and the folder of evidence. If you walk out that door, Ilora, you are truly alone. Evelyn shouted from the dining room, her voice finally cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. They don't love you. They never did. It was always just a performance. You'll come back. You always come back. Ilora paused at the door. She looked back at the beautiful, pristine house, the marble, the silk, the rosemary-scented air. It looked like a tomb. I'd rather be alone in the dark, Ilora said, than live in a spotlight you control. She stepped out into the night. The cool air hit her face, and for the first time in a decade, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. As she drove away, she saw her mother standing in the doorway, a silhouette framed by the golden light of the house. Evelyn didn't move. She just watched, a creator losing her creation, her shadow long and twisted on the manicured lawn. The first night of freedom didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a crash. Ilora checked into a nondescript motel on the edge of the city, a place where the air smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and stale cigarettes, a harsh, honest contrast to the curated rose-scented prison she had called home. She sat on the edge of the stiff polyester bedspread, her hands finally beginning to shake. For 30 years, she had been a character in someone else's play. Now, the stage was empty, the lights were out, and she didn't know a single line of her own. She spent the first 48 hours in a digital fever dream. She changed every password, revoked every shared access, and factory reset her phone 3 times. She felt like she was scrubbing a layer of filth off her soul. Then came the hardest part, the restitution. Clearing the record. She didn't reach out to Mark or Liam to beg for them to come back. She reached out to give them their lives back. She sent a concise, professional email to the hospital board where Mark worked, attaching the original Project Mark files and the digital footprints of the Guardian Shadow account. She received a reply from their legal department 2 days later. Mark's name was being cleared, and the hospital was considering its own legal action against Evelyn for defamation and harassment. She met Liam one last time at the docks. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just stood by the water, the salt air stinging their eyes. I'm moving to Vermont, Liam said, looking out at the horizon. I need to live in a place where the trees don't remind me of the house I almost lived in with a ghost. I understand, Ilora said. You're brave, Ilora, he added, looking at her with a clarity that finally replaced the pity. Most people would rather live in a beautiful lie than a cold truth. You chose the cold. That makes you stronger than she ever gave you credit for. As he walked away, Ilora felt a cord snap. It wasn't the pain of a breakup, it was the peace of a finished chapter. She wasn't the dying girl or the abandoned fiancé anymore. She was just Ilora. The architecture of the self. The next 6 months were a grueling exercise in reconstruction. Ilora moved into a studio apartment that was small, slightly drafty, and entirely her own. She started therapy twice a week. Her therapist, a dry-wit woman named Dr. Eris, helped her dismantle the unstable narrative. Your mother didn't protect you from your darkness, Ilora, Dr. Eris said during one particularly heavy session. She manufactured the darkness so she could sell you the flashlight. You aren't delicate. You've survived a decade of psychological siege. You are, quite literally, one of the most resilient people I've ever met. Ilora began to work. She took a job in a local library, not a high-powered career Evelyn would have approved of, but a quiet, steady role that allowed her to surround herself with stories that had actual endings. She started painting again. Not the curated watercolors her mother preferred, but bold, messy acrylics with clashing colors and jagged edges. They were ugly, and she loved them because they were hers. Evelyn, of course, did not go quietly. The no-contact order was met with a barrage of tactics. First came the flowers, hundreds of dollars worth of white lilies delivered to the library with notes saying "I forgive you for your outburst." Ilora had them sent to a local nursing home. Then came the emergency. A lawyer called Ilora claiming Evelyn had suffered a stress-induced cardiac event and was calling for her daughter from her hospital bed. For a moment, the old Ilora, the compliant, guilty daughter, wanted to scream and run to the car. But the new Ilora took a breath. She called the hospital. She confirmed that Evelyn had been admitted for observation after a self-reported fainting spell, but her vitals were perfect. "Tell her I hope she enjoys the rest," Ilora told the nurse, and hung up. The final attempt was a legal threat, Evelyn trying to sue Ilora for elderly abandonment and to reclaim gifts, the car, the clothes, the jewelry. Ilora's lawyer, a sharp man she had paid for with the small inheritance her father had left in a trust Evelyn couldn't touch, sent back a single folder, the evidence of identity theft and medical forgery. The lawsuit was dropped within 24 hours. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Ilora had ever heard. The first date. 6 months and 10 days after she walked out of the mahogany house, Ilora stood in front of a mirror in her studio apartment. She wasn't wearing silk. She was wearing a thrift denim jacket and a pair of boots that had seen better days. She looked at her reflection. She didn't see a masterpiece. She saw a woman with a few more lines around her eyes and a posture that no longer leaned toward a phantom. Her phone buzzed. A text from a man named Julian, not that Julian, but a high school teacher she had met at a book fair. Outside. No rush. I found a place that has the worst tacos and the best live music in the city. Interested? Ilora smiled. It wasn't a curated smile. It was a genuine, slightly nervous one. She walked down the stairs of her apartment building. Julian was leaning against a beat-up Subaru, checking his watch. When he saw her, his face lit up. It wasn't the look of a man looking at a delicate prize, it was the look of a man happy to see a friend. "You look great," he said, opening the car door. "I feel like myself," she replied. As they drove through the city, Ilora's phone sat in her pocket. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel the urge to check it. She didn't wonder if a mirroring app was tracking her GPS. She didn't wonder if an anonymous email was being sent to her date's employer. She realized that the 30-year curse wasn't broken by a prince or a grand gesture. It was broken by the mundane, quiet act of being unobserved. They reached the taco stand. The music was loud, the lighting was terrible, and the air smelled of grease and laughter. Ilora sat across from Julian, took a bite of a questionable carnitas taco, and laughed. "What's so funny?" Julian asked, grinning. "Nothing," Ilora said, wiping a stray drop of hot sauce from her chin. "I just realized that for the first time in my life, I don't know what happens next." "Is that a bad thing?" Ilora looked at the dark sky, the stars peeking through the city's light pollution. They weren't arranged in a pattern. They were just there, random, bright, and free. "No," Ilora said, her voice clear and firm. "It's the best part of the story."